to be honest with you. Another drowning in the Mediterranean is not news. It is not news. It's a tragedy. It's sad for the family. It is not news. It has happened hundreds and hundreds of times. That is not news. A demonstration outside the Eritrean embassy is not news. It may make you feel better, but it's happened hundreds of times. It is not news. News is something you've never seen before. News is what it says on the front. It is new, right? It's really simple. These are not difficult. So you're manufacturing the news, but you need to think of the angle. Do not go and have another demonstration outside the Eritrean embassy unless you're going to burn it down. Which I didn't say, okay. Finally,
it will not be minuted.
Yes.
How would Americans and lawmakers react today if Memorial Day commemorations were violently attacked? Premeditated attack on Eritrean-Americans. The conflict between Eritrean-Americans and TPLF Tigray supporters has descended into a troubling asymmetrical clash within American cities, with law-abiding citizens facing off against the transnational violent group known as Brigade Nhamedu. This writing aims to enlighten individuals about the unjust dynamics of this confrontation, exposing the manipulation, violence, and injustices endured by those advocating for peaceful assembly and freedom within democratic nations globally. The contrast in tactics between law-abiding Eritrean-Americans and individuals from the Ethiopian region of Tigray and TPLF supporters, who have rebranded themselves as Brigade Nhamedu, exacerbates the inequity of the conflict. While law-abiding Eritrean-American citizens adhere to ethical principles, legal boundaries, and societal norms, limiting their capacity to counter the radical group on a global scale effectively, Brigade Nhamedu operates with impunity. Exploiting legal loopholes and weaknesses in the system, they evade accountability for their actions, perpetuating chaos and violence unchecked. Eritrean Americans typically gather to celebrate their birth nation's sovereignty, heroism, and social accomplishments. Such events have taken place worldwide peacefully until the recent development of this transnational violent and extremist group, with some cities hosting them since the early 1980s. However, their gatherings are increasingly disrupted and threatened by the violent actions of Brigade Nhamedu, whose primary objective is to shut down Eritrean events through any means necessary. Understanding the challenges faced by Eritrea as a young nation is essential. Despite gaining independence only 30 years ago, Eritrea has been subjected to relentless attacks, border conflicts, and sanctions, perpetuating a perpetual state of emergency and defense. Like any country in its formative years, Eritrea is undergoing growth and development, grappling with the inevitable pains accompanying nation-building. The ongoing tension with Ethiopia, historically led by the Tigray people who now orchestrate the riots and disturbances globally, further compounds Eritrea's challenges. On the contrary, members of Brigade Nhamedu, advocates of Abiy Tigray, aspiring for an independent Great Tigray encompassing the Eritrean Red Sea, a nation primarily governed by Tigrinya-speaking ethnics, resort to acts of violence, vandalism, and intimidation, often masquerading as Eritreans. Their disruptive actions not only smear the reputation of the Eritrean government and its community but also sustain a cycle of retaliation and aggression. The border between Eritrea and Ethiopia stretches approximately 1,033 kilometers, marking the boundary between the two nations. Situated on the northern side of Ethiopia, the Tigray region shares a border with Eritrea. The people in the Tigray region speak the same language as the Eritrean ethnic group Tigrinya. The historical relationship between the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, and the ruling party in Eritrea, the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, PFDJ, adds complexity to the conflict. While initially allies in the fight against the Derg regime in Ethiopia, tensions resurfaced when Ethiopia initiated the border conflict in 1998, leading to a prolonged period of no war, no peace. Until 2018. In 2018, the Tigray-dominated government in Ethiopia suffered a significant defeat to the new administration led by President Abiy Ahmed. Subsequently, the Tigray region fought with the federal Ethiopian and Eritrean governments to regain power in Ethiopia, resulting in a decisive defeat for the Tigray forces. This defeat marked the genesis of Brigade Nhamedu, a retaliatory act driven by a desire for revenge against Eritreans. By any means. Brigade Nhamedu members arrive at demonstrations or Eritrean event venues armed with a flag mounted on a makeshift pole with a screw or nail on it, along with bricks and rocks, with the intent to target those standing before them, starting with law enforcement and Eritrean-Americans who are peacefully celebrating Eritrean holidays or holding meetings. This group has been swayed to redefine their demonstration tactics by academic propagandists and fabricators like Mirjam van Rijzen at Leiden University and Martin Plot at the University of London. These individuals purportedly guide anti-Eritrean demonstrators to do not protest in front of the Eritrean embassy unless you intend to set it on fire. The premeditated Brigade Nhamedu's unprecedented brutality was evident as they fearlessly set fire to cars, tents, and structures, defying the familial atmosphere of the festivals around the globe. Brigade Nhamedu, representing the defeated TPLF Tigray group in Ethiopia, employs a cunning strategy to further their agenda. Initially, they leveraged their understanding of the Eritrean language to pose as Eritreans seeking asylum in various countries, exploiting the perception of Eritrea as a human rights violating nation by Western nations. Engaging in a numbers game, they appear in large groups to create the illusion of internal conflict within Eritrea. This tactic aims to mislead observers, particularly those unfamiliar with the complexities of the region's dynamics, while also enabling them to advocate for sanctions against the Eritrean government, infiltrate gatherings, and incite violence within the Eritrean community. Secondly, they prominently display flags of the USA or other sympathetic countries to manipulate perceptions and garner international support. This calculated move portrays them as allies of powerful nations, furthering their deceptive facade and legitimizing their actions in the eyes of the international community. Thirdly, Brigade Nhamedu uses the Eritrean language to hurl curses and disrespect, aiming to provoke and antagonize genuine Eritrean supporters. Simultaneously, they strategically switch to English to proclaim their purported love for America or the country where they are demonstrating. This linguistic duality incites division and confusion among bystanders while attempting to portray themselves as allies of Western nations, furthering their deceptive agenda. Such calculated manipulation of language underscores the insidious nature of their tactics and adds another layer of complexity to the unfair fight between law-abiding citizens and terrorists. Ultimately, they aim to escalate riots and target Eritrean events, individuals, or symbols as a form of retaliation for their perceived losses in Tigray. This vengeful approach perpetuates a cycle of violence and vengeance, exacerbating the unfairness of the conflict and undermining efforts for peace and reconciliation. The consequences of this unfair fight are dire. Law-abiding Eritrean-Americans face physical harm, threats, and intimidation while being unjustly blamed for violence perpetrated by Brigade Nhamedu. Meanwhile, the radical group manipulates media narratives, absolves themselves of responsibility, and vilifies innocent Eritrean-Americans, further exacerbating the injustice and perpetuating a cycle of violence and mistrust. In conclusion, the unfair battle between law-abiding citizens and transnational violent groups exemplifies the complexities and injustices inherent in the struggle for peace and freedom. The international community must recognize and address these injustices, support the efforts of law-abiding citizens, and hold violent groups accountable for their actions to pave the way for lasting peace and stability in their cities.